Good evening. Welcome to the Indiana University Cinema virtual screening room and our screening of The Donut King. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous communities native to this region and recognize that Indiana University Cinema is built on Indigenous homelands and resources. We recognize the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee nations as past, present, and future caretakers of this land. This screening marks the return of our ongoing Movement Asian Pacific America series, curated by and presented in partnership with the Asian Culture Center and the Asian American Studies program as part of Indiana University's annual Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration. This series invites audiences to consider the multifaceted vibrancies and complexities of Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Asian Pacific diasporic individuals and communities. We are heartbroken that this year's movement screening comes in the wake of the horrific racist attacks in Atlanta on March 16th and a year of rising anti-Asian discrimination and violence. The IU Cinema team is in solidarity with Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities. We mourn this enormous loss with you. We condemn the racism and xenophobia that have endangered you throughout this nation's history. And we are committed to using our position as an organization to make sure you are welcomed, valued, heard, and celebrated. Our audience manager, Jessica, is sharing 2 links in the chat, which the Asian Culture Center has shared as 2 concrete ways we can all support the AAPI community now. The first is a bystander intervention training workshop to stop anti-Asian harassment hosted by Great Lakes Asian American Student Services, taking place April 9th. The second is a petition to Governor Holcomb urging him to condemn racism against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We encourage each of you watching tonight to take direct action in your lives and within your communities, and thank you all for joining us and supporting the movement series. I will now introduce Kevin Shahura, who will then introduce tonight's film. Kevin is a graduate assistant at the Asian Culture Center and is pursuing a Master of Public Affairs and Master of Science in Environmental Science dual degree at the O'Neill School. Let's welcome Kevin Shahura.
Thanks, Melissa. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our screening of The Donut King, sponsored by IU Cinema, the IU Asian Culture Center, and the Asian American Studies program. My name is Kevin Shahura, and I'm the graduate assistant at the Asian Culture Center, and I'm pleased to present this event. The Donut King is a documentary about the life of Ted Ngoy, who arrived in the United States from Cambodia as a refugee in 1975. Ngoy eventually went on to build a donut empire in California and helped to sponsor more than 100 Cambodian refugees to come to America and learn the donut business. At one point, reportedly 80% of all independent donut shops in California were owned by Cambodians. Yet Ngoy built his own personal wealth, but he also opened up many opportunities for others along the way. I cannot think of a more important time to learn about the experiences and contributions of Asian refugees and Asian immigrants in the US. There has been an alarming rise in anti-Asian violence throughout the pandemic, culminating in last week's attacks in Georgia. People around the country are increasingly recognizing the racism that has been directed against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. The complex lives of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been invisible throughout the history of the US, and this has led to damaging stereotypes as perpetual foreigners. This invisibility also contributes to the model minority myth, which erases the experiences of low-income members of the AAPI community, many of whom work in the service industry. Films like The Donut King are vital representation and reminders of the contributions that Asian Americans, immigrants, and refugees have brought to the US. Tonight, you will watch one man's story, but please remember that Asians have always been a part of America's story. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and please enjoy the show.
Thank you all again for joining us. Be well, be kind to yourselves and others, and have a great night.